My name is Jordan Hayes. I was 23 years old when my older brother turned the proudest night of my life into a family comedy routine. At my graduation party, he grabbed the microphone before I had even finished, thanking everyone for coming. He raised his glass, looked directly at me, and said, "Let's toast to the family black sheep, who somehow got a degree." For half a second, the room went silent. Then everyone laughed. My aunts laughed. My cousins laughed. Even the people who barely knew me followed along, because they assumed humiliation was part of the entertainment. My father smiled and said, "He's just joking." My mother looked away, but she did not defend me. I smiled too. I even lifted my glass because refusing would have made me the difficult one. Again, what no one in that room knew was that I had spent the previous 2 years quietly financing part of my brother's business. I had delayed moving into a better apartment, canceled a trip after college, and transferred money whenever he claimed his startup was one payment away from success. He called me the black sheep while standing under lights partly paid for with money he owed me. I said nothing that night. 4 days later, I withdrew my investment, froze the shared loan account, and sent documents to someone my brother had been desperately trying to impress. At exactly 7:45 the next morning, my family received news that made his cruel toast look like the smallest mistake he had ever made. Before I tell you what that news was and what happened after my brother realized I was no longer his private emergency fund, tell me, what time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I want to know how far the story travels. My brother's name was Chase, and for as long as I could remember, my family had treated his ambition like evidence of greatness, and mine like evidence that I was trying too hard. Chase was 3 years older than me, charming when he needed something, funny when the joke was aimed at someone else, and remarkably skilled at turning every failure into a story about how the world had misunderstood him when he dropped out of a business program after one semester. My parents said traditional education could not contain his creativity. When I earned scholarships and worked 20 hours a week while finishing my degree, they said I had always been more comfortable following rules. Chase was called fearless. I was called cautious. Chase was exploring opportunities. I was taking too long to figure out what I wanted. That graduation party was supposed to be the one evening when the comparison stopped. Instead, his toast told me that even my achievement would be filtered through the role they had chosen for me. I spent the first day after the party doing absolutely nothing about it. That surprised me. I had imagined rage would feel loud, but mine felt precise. I replayed the video guests had posted online. In one clip, Chase tapped the microphone and waited until he had everyone's attention. In another, my father leaned toward an uncle before the punchline as though he already knew what was coming. My mother smiled weakly before looking down at her plate. Then came the laughter. What bothered me most was not Chase's sentence, it was how naturally everyone accepted it. No one appeared shocked that he had called me the family black sheep at my own graduation. The joke worked because they already believed some version of it. On the second day, I opened a storage box containing old photographs, report cards, and letters I had kept since high school. One picture showed Chase and me sitting behind a folding table at a neighborhood fair. He was selling customized phone cases, his first company, and I was keeping track of every purchase because he had forgotten to bring change. On the back, my mother had written Chase's first business. There was no mention of me. Another photograph showed him holding a trophy from a regional youth competition. I had written his presentation, created the budget chart, and stayed awake until 2 o'clock in the morning fixing his slides. My father had framed the picture and told everyone Chase had always been a natural entrepreneur. Looking at those photos, I understood that the graduation toast had not created the problem. It had merely exposed the arrangement. Chase was allowed to perform success, while I was expected to provide invisible support. His latest startup was called Northline, a scheduling platform designed for small delivery companies. The idea was not terrible. The problem was that Chase treated confidence as a substitute for preparation. 18 months earlier, he had asked me to invest $10,000. He said he needed the money to hire a developer and promised I would own 12% of the company. I refused at first. Then my parents called separately. My mother said Chase needed someone who believed in him. My father reminded me that successful families pool their strengths. Eventually, I agreed to contribute $6,000 from my savings provided. Everything was documented. Chase complained that contracts made family relationships feel cold, but I insisted. 3 months later, he needed more. A potential investor wanted to see enough operating capital to cover 6 months of expenses. Chase Snorts asked me to join a secured line of credit. The account would allow either of us to deposit funds, but withdrawals above a set amount required both signatures. I was not merely a helpful sister. I was a legal guarantor. My credit history was stronger than his, so the bank approved the facility. Largely because of me, I had the right to suspend further borrowing if I believed funds were being misused, or if the business's financial condition materially changed. Chase knew that. He had signed the same documents I had. On the 3rd day after graduation, I reviewed every statement. I discovered late software payments, unexplained restaurant charges, a luxury, a hotel bill from a supposed networking weekend, and 2 transfers labeled consulting to an account I did not recognize. The total was not enough to prove fraud, but it was enough to show that Chase had not been honest about how close Northline was to running out of money. He had told me a major contract was practically guaranteed. The bank statements showed the company might not survive another month without the line of credit. That evening, Chase sent me a photograph from the graduation party. It showed him holding the microphone while I stood beside him with a frozen smile. His message read, "You survived the roast. Proud of you, black sheep." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I saved the message, downloaded the video, and added both to a folder with the financial records. He thought he was continuing a joke. To me, he had just confirmed that the humiliation was intentional. At 9 o'clock the next morning, I walked into the bank, carrying a binder. I withdrew the remaining personal funds that had not yet been formally converted into company equity. Then I exercised the suspension clause on the shared credit facility. I did not seize Chase's money, empty a business account, or interfere with funds that legally belonged to Northline. I simply removed my money and refused to guarantee any new debt. The branch manager reviewed the agreement twice before processing the request. "This will stop any pending draws," she warned. "Your co-borrower will be notified." I said, "I understand." Before leaving, I also emailed Northline's financial information to the attorney who had drafted my investment agreement. I asked him to preserve my rights and verify whether Chase had violated the reporting requirements. I had spent years believing boundaries needed to be emotional speeches. That morning, I learned the strongest boundary could be a signature on a bank form. At 10:16, Chase texted me, Why is the loan account restricted? At 10:18, another message appeared. Jordan, this isn't funny. At 10:24, he called 3 times. By noon, he had left 2 voice messages, accusing the bank of making a mistake. I did not answer. At 1:07, his tone changed. We have a contract review this week. Call me before you ruin something you don't understand. That sentence almost made me laugh. I understood more than he realized.
What
Chase did not know was that his contract review had already raised questions unrelated to me, and the suspension of my guarantee was about to force those questions into the open. My mother, Anna, called the following morning before I had finished making coffee. She did not ask how I was feeling after graduation. She did not mention the toast. She began with, "What have you done to your brother?" Her voice carried the breathless urgency she usually reserved for hospital visits and funerals. I placed the phone on speaker and continued pouring coffee because I knew I would need both hands free to keep them from shaking. I withdrew my personal investment and suspended a credit line that depended on my guarantee. I said, "You froze his company's money." No, I froze access to money the bank would have lent based partly on my credit. Jordan, don't play with words. Chase has employees. He has 2 contractors and an unpaid intern. That is not the point. He says a major deal could collapse. Then his company was depending on money he did not own. My mother exhaled sharply. This is because of the graduation joke, isn't it? The word joke landed exactly as Chase had intended it to. It made my reaction seem irrational. Before I had even explained it, he humiliated me in front of nearly 80 people. You know your brother? He uses humor when he feels nervous. Why was he nervous at my graduation? Because he has been under enormous pressure. You graduated. Everyone was praising you. And maybe he felt overlooked. I almost asked whether she could hear herself. Instead, I let the silence stretch. My mother had transformed his cruelty into vulnerability and my achievement into the trigger that supposedly caused it. That was how our family operated. Chase acted. I reacted. Then everyone examined my reaction as though it were the original offense. His feelings do not entitle him to mine. Money, I said. Family is not a business transaction. It became one when he asked me to sign loan documents. He is your brother, and I am his sister. Why does that obligation only move in one direction? My mother's tone hardened. You have always kept score. That accusation pulled me into a memory from 7 years earlier. I was 16, working weekends at a grocery store to save for a used laptop. Chase borrowed $400 from my envelope because he wanted to enter a business competition. When I asked for it back, my father told me not to be selfish because Chase's opportunity could benefit the entire family. He won 3rd place and used the prize money for a weekend trip with friends. I never recovered my savings. Years later, the family still told the story of how they had supported his first major opportunity. I kept records. I told my mother, that is different from keeping score. She lowered her voice. Your father is furious. Is he furious about what Chase said? You know, your father doesn't like public conflict. There wasn't a conflict at the party because I stayed quiet, and now you're punishing everyone afterward. There it was. Silence was acceptable only if it remained permanent. They had mistaken my restraint for consent. My mother told me that Chase had been awake all night. A peril transfer had failed. A vendor wanted immediate payment. His largest prospective client, Mercer Fleet, Services had requested updated proof of financial stability before signing a 6-month trial agreement without access to the line of credit Northline could not show the reserves Chase had promised. My mother said this as though each detail proved I had caused the emergency. To me, it proved the opposite. No responsible business should require a sister's personal guarantee to create the appearance of stability for a client. Then she said something that changed my sadness into suspicion. He already counted your next contribution in the forecast. My next contribution? She stopped speaking. What contribution, Mom? He said you had agreed to put in another $15,000 after graduation. I never agreed to that. He showed your father a projection with your name on it. I set down my mug. Did Dad tell anyone else I had committed that money? I don't know. Did Chase? I said I don't know, Jordan, but the panic in her voice told me she knew enough. Chase had not simply expected my continued support. He had represented it as guaranteed, possibly to my parents, the bank, vendors, or a Mercer. That meant his financial problem was larger than a frozen account. He may have built his company's credibility on a promise I had never made. I told my mother to ask Chase for the documents. Showing my authorization, she immediately returned to guilt. Do you really want to destroy your relationship over paperwork? No, I want to know whether my brother used my name to obtain money. He would never do anything illegal. Then he should have no trouble showing me. She began crying, not loudly, but enough to make me feel like the cruel person in the conversation. I don't recognize you right now. For years, that sentence would have broken me. I would have apologized simply to restore peace. But I finally understood that she did not recognize me because she was meeting the version of me who required evidence. Maybe you never had to recognize me before, I said. Maybe you only had to know I would say yes. She hung up. At 11:30, my father sent me a message. Your brother made a tasteless joke. You are responding by threatening people's livelihoods. Adults understand proportion. I read it twice. Then I attached a screenshot of Chase's message calling me the black sheep again 3 days after the party. I also attached the section of the loan agreement giving me the right to suspend future draws. My father replied, legal rights are not the same as moral rights. That sentence stayed with me. Apparently, Chase's right to my labor and money was treated as moral, while my legal ability to protect myself was treated as betrayal. My best friend, Emily, came to my apartment that evening, but I did not spend hours retelling every insult. I gave her the binder and asked her to help me arrange the timeline. Emily was an operations analyst, practical and unsentimental. She spread the statements across my dining table and circled inconsistencies. One payment labeled software development had gone to a marketing company, dissolved 6 months earlier. The company's former owner was one of Chase's college friends. A supposed client deposit had actually come from my father's personal account. Most importantly, an internal forecast listed JH family capital commitment, $15,000 as confirmed funding. That's your initials, Emily said. I never saw this. Then you need to stop treating this like a sibling argument. The next morning, my attorney confirmed that the forecast could be a serious misrepresentation if Chase had shared it with lenders or prospective partners as verified funding. He advised me to send a formal notice stating that I had made no additional commitment and did not authorize anyone to use my name, credit, or expected funds in business projections. I sent the notice to Chase and Northline's registered company email. I copied the account listed in my agreement. Chase called within 2 minutes. This time, I answered. What are you trying to do? He shouted. Correct a false statement. It's A. Forecast, Jordan. Forecasts include expected capital. You marked it. Confirmed. Because you always help. The honesty of that sentence stunned me. More than a denial would have. You listed my money as confirmed because you assumed I could be pressured into giving it to you. I assumed my sister wouldn't sabotage me over a joke. You made the assumption before the joke. He went silent. I told him we would meet the next day at a cafe near his office. I would bring the documents. He would bring every version of the forecast and explain who had received them. And if I don't, he asked, then my attorney will ask. For the first time in our lives, Chase did not have a clever response. Chase arrived 20 minutes late wearing the navy blazer he used whenever he wanted to look more successful than he felt. He saw my binder and accused me of turning a family disagreement into a legal case. I asked who had received the forecast, listing my $15,000 as confirmed funding. Instead of answering, he said the real issue was that I had been embarrassed at a party and decided to destroy his company. I placed my phone on the table and played the graduation recording. His voice filled the cafe. Let's toast to the family black sheep who somehow got a degree. When the laughter followed, Chase told me to turn it off. I asked why, since it had supposedly been only a joke. He claimed it came out wrong, but I reminded him that he called me the black sheep again in a message 3 days later. He said he thought we had that kind of relationship. I told him he had that relationship with me because I had been expected to absorb whatever he said without objecting. Chase accused me of enjoying the role of the responsible sister because it made me feel needed. A small part of that was true. For years, every emergency had temporarily made me important in a family that otherwise overlooked me. But being needed was not the same as being valued. I returned to the forecast and demanded names. Chase finally admitted that Mercer, 2 angel investors and a lender had seen versions of it. He had told them family capital was committed even though I had never agreed. He also admitted using information about my salary and credit. When seeking a bridge loan months earlier, he had asked casual questions about my job applications and finals. I had believed he was interested in my future. In reality, he had been gathering information. Under pressure, Chase revealed that Northline had lost a pilot client in March, although he had told me the agreement was extended. He had also represented the canceled pilot as continuing revenue because he needed time to replace it. When I asked why he had humiliated me at graduation, his frustration finally broke through. You graduated with honors. You got interviews, and everyone started talking about how disciplined you were. Do you know what that did to me? He demanded. Then he admitted that I was supposed to be the sibling who took longer to succeed. I had changed majors and struggled during my first year, and the family had used my uncertainty to make Chase look stronger. My graduation threatened that story. You needed everyone to remember who I was supposed to be, I said. He did not deny it. Chase begged me to reinstate the credit line for 30 days. If Mercer signed, he claimed the first payment would cover everything. He even offered me more equity. I refused to accept shares in a company whose financial condition had been concealed from me. His desperation turned to anger. It would have worked if you hadn't decided to have a breakdown, he said. I closed the binder and told him my attorney would notify everyone that I had made no additional commitment. Chase warned that if Northline failed, he would make sure the family knew I caused it. I told him to share the entire story, beginning with the false forecast. That afternoon, my attorney sent factual notices to Northline's accountant, the lender, and Mercer's compliance department. At 6:12, Mercer replied that the contract would be paused for review. By midnight, its compliance team had contacted the accountant and investors. At exactly 7:45 the next morning, the email arrived. I woke at 7:38 to 17. Missed calls. At 7:45 a.m., Mercer Fleet services formally terminated. Negotiations with Northline, its compliance review, had uncovered 3 material misrepresentations. My unapproved $15,000 investment had been listed as confirmed capital. A canceled pilot program had been presented as recurring revenue, and an hourly contractor had been described as a full-time technical employee. The bridge lender suspended Chase's loan application. Both investors demanded complete financial records, and Northline's accountant resigned after stating that he had not approved the financial summary submitted to Mercer. That was the real shocking news. Chase had told everyone my withdrawal destroyed a healthy company, but my notice had exposed that Northline was being held together by misleading documents. At 7:49, Chase texted, "What did you tell them?" A few minutes later, he demanded that I explain everything as a family misunderstanding. My father called and ordered me to retract my statement. I asked what he expected me to say, that I had planned to invest when I had, not that Chase had permission to use my salary and credit when he did not. My father told me that protecting family sometimes required flexibility with the truth. In that moment, I understood where Chase had learned his behavior. Truth was treated as negotiable whenever honesty threatened the family's preferred image. I refused to lie, and my father warned me not to call when I realized what I had done. That evening, my mother organized an emergency family meeting and invited many of the same relatives who had laughed at graduation. When I arrived, Chase sat beside her, looking exhausted, while my father stood near the fireplace like a judge. My mother accused me of escalating an offensive joke into a crisis that threatened jobs, investments, and the family's reputation. Several relatives nodded until I placed copies of Mercer's letter on the table and asked them to read the second paragraph. I explained that Mercer had not canceled because I withdrew my support. The company canceled because Chase's documents contained false information. Chase insisted that the numbers had only been projections, but he could not answer when I asked why. They were labeled confirmed. My uncle questioned the canceled pilot revenue. Another relative asked why my private financial information had been included in a loan request. The room changed when Chase shouted, "None of this would matter if Jordan had just done what she always does and helped." Everyone went silent. I looked around at the relatives who had come prepared to condemn me and said, "That is the entire problem. He used my name because he assumed I would help." Snorts. He counted money I never promised because he assumed I would help. Then he mocked me in public because he also assumed I would remain silent. My grandmother asked Chase whether he had apologized. He replied that it had only been a joke. She said, "That wasn't my question." When my father argued that blame would not save the company, my grandmother answered, "Maybe the company should not be saved." By another lie, Chase accused me of always wanting to prove I was better than him. I told him I had only wanted him to stop needing me beneath him. He left the house furious, but the family protection surrounding him had finally cracked. Some relatives apologized for laughing. At graduation, others admitted they had not known how much money and credit I had contributed. Within days, both investors froze additional support, the remaining contractor resigned, and a vendor filed a collection claim. Northline did not collapse because I was cruel. It collapsed because once my money, credit, and silence were removed, there was nothing stable underneath. 3 nights later, Chase pounded on my apartment door hard enough to shake the frame. I saw him through the security, a camera, and refused to let him in. He accused me of humiliating him before. The family then demanded that I reopen the credit line for 1 week so he could secure a smaller contract. He promised no money would leave the account, but my guarantee would still create the appearance of reserves. I refused. Chase said Northline's landlord had locked him out of the office, clear his throat. His car payment was overdue, and my parents had already used part of their retirement savings to help him. He insisted one final contract could fix everything. To me, his explanation proved that every promise had been used to cover an earlier promise. More money would not save the company. It would only create another victim. When I continued to refuse, Chase threatened to accuse me of falsifying company records and sabotaging him. I reminded him that the documents contained digital records showing where and when they were created. He then threatened to contact my new employer and tell them I had destroyed a company for revenge. I informed him that the hallway camera was recording and that any false statement, financial interference, or contact with my employer would be handled through my attorney. When a neighbor appeared near the elevator, Chase immediately lowered his voice. That sudden change showed he was not out of control. He was willing to frighten me only when he believed no one else was watching. Before leaving, he accused me of choosing strangers over my brother. I replied, I'm choosing reality over your version of family. The following morning, I sent the footage to my attorney, changed my financial passwords, enabled additional credit security, and warned my employer that a relative involved in a failed business dispute might make false claims. Chase never contacted them. Meanwhile, Northline's office equipment was sold. The company website disappeared, and Chase's lease car was repossessed from my parents' driveway. My father continued blaming me until he discovered that Chase had taken $32,000 from my parents over 18 months, not the $12,000 he had admitted. Some of that money came from their retirement account. My mother found expensive dinners, concert tickets, and a resort stay, categorized as business development. Then they discovered that Chase had also told an investor they had committed another $20,000, even though they had not. For the first time, my parents understood that I had not been uniquely disloyal. I had simply been the first person to refuse. My mother called and admitted they had made life too easy for Chase and too difficult for anyone who challenged him. She apologized for not defending me at graduation, confessing that she had allowed the room to laugh because she believed humiliating me would release some of Chase's pressure. My father sent a shorter message admitting he had been wrong about why Mercer canceled the contract. Neither apology repaired everything, but they were the first cracks in a family pattern that had existed for years. Chase moved back into my parents' house, sold most of his electronics, and took a part-time warehouse job through an uncle. Some relatives treated honest work as humiliation, but I did not. His real consequence was losing the ability to manipulate other people into financing his image. My phone stopped ringing with financial emergencies. No one asked me to delay my plans for him. No one praised his ambition while treating my discipline as an obligation. The silence that remained no longer felt lonely. It felt like freedom. 6 months after graduation, I stood inside a converted warehouse gallery beside 3 pieces of my own artwork. It was not a glamorous debut, only a community exhibition for local artists, students, and designers. But I had earned my place there without Chase, my parents, or the family name. Emily had encouraged me to submit a mixed media series created from copied financial forms, childhood photographs, handwritten labels, and fragments of graduation ribbons. I called the series Assigned Roles. One piece contained the old photograph of Chase and me at the neighborhood fair with my accounting notes placed beneath the words unseen labor. Another used a blurred frame from the graduation recording to show how a public joke could reveal a private hierarchy. The final piece showed a black sheep stepping outside the border of a family portrait. The space beyond the frame was not empty. It was open. My mother attended alone. She stood before unseen labor and admitted she remembered the fair, but had forgotten that I managed the money. I told her that forgetting my contribution had always been the problem. She did not defend herself. My father did not attend, but he sent flowers with a card congratulating me on my work. For once, he did not mention Chase or compare us. Near the end of the exhibition, I noticed Chase standing at the entrance. North Line had been formally dissolved, the bridge loan permanently denied, and one investor had negotiated a repayment plan. Chase was still working at the warehouse and had begun an online bookkeeping course because no relative would support another business until he learned to understand financial records. He stopped in front of the graduation piece and asked whether people would know it was about him. I said no names were included. He replied that they might guess. Then perhaps the joke was more memorable than you intended, I told him. Chase admitted that he had been jealous. My graduation made him afraid that people would notice he had no idea what he was doing. So he reminded everyone that I was supposed to be the confused sibling. He apologized for using my name in the forecast and for calling me the black sheep. It was the first apology without an excuse attached. I told him I believed he was sorry, but regret did not immediately restore trust. When he asked what he needed to do, I told him to stop searching for the fastest route back into my life. He needed to repay our parents, finish his course, keep an honest job, and tell the truth, even when it made him look bad. And then he asked, "Then we see who you become." I said. Before leaving, he looked at the artwork of the black sheep outside the family portrait and quietly admitted it was good. It was not a perfect reconciliation. My parents were still confronting how often they had protected Chase at my expense. Chase was still facing debt and damaged trust, and I was still unlearning the belief that love had to be earned through sacrifice. But no one was demanding that I erase the past to restore the family's comfort. The greatest thing I gained was not revenge, it was authorship. My family had written a role for me, the confused daughter, the overly sensitive sister, the reliable emergency fund, the black sheep who should be grateful to belong. By withdrawing my money, correcting the false documents, and refusing to lie. After the email arrived at 7:45 a.m., I stopped performing that role. I did not destroy a healthy company because a joke hurt my feelings. I stopped allowing an unhealthy company to use my credit, savings, and silence as life support. If the truth can destroy something, the truth is not the problem. Chase had held the microphone at graduation, but the laughter came from the entire room. My father's smile gave the joke permission. My mother's silence protected it, and my forced smile completed the performance. The cycle ended when I stopped cooperating. Maybe your family has assigned you role 2, the responsible one who must solve every emergency, the difficult one who notices unfairness, or the successful one expected to apologize for shining. Ask yourself who benefits when you keep playing that role. I once believed revenge meant making Chase feel the humiliation I felt at graduation. Now I know that would have kept my life centered on him. Real freedom meant building something that did not require his failure or approval. His consequences belonged to him. My future belonged to me. At graduation, my brother called me the family black sheep, and everyone laughed because they believed being outside the family's chosen role was shameful. They were wrong. Sometimes the black sheep is simply the first person brave enough to leave the cage. So tell me in the comments, have you ever been labeled the problem because you finally set a boundary? Would you have reopened the account to protect your brother? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Revenge is not always about destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is refusing to carry them while you build a life they can no longer control.